This is Andrea Longton.
This is Leah Freemouth.
And this is Ebony Perkins. And we are Redicade Capital.
All views expressed in this podcast are our own. We are not financial planners, investment advisors, or tax advisors. The views that we have on this show do not necessarily reflect the views and opinions of the people who sign our paychecks. So please keep that in mind and always consult a trained financial professional before you start moving your hard-earned money. Let's dive in.
So Andrea, what's going on in your world? I feel like something big is about to drop.
It is. My parents this morning sent me a text and said, "Look what we found." I'm like, what is going on? And they sent me a screenshot of Amazon.com where my book is now available for pre-order. It's like, oh my gosh, I had no idea it was there. And I am like, oh my gosh, my parents just sent me this. And then Kaya found it on Barnes and Noble and was like, this is real. This is happening.
Coming out. Is coming out. Oh, this is so exciting. Congrats.
Wait, so the social justice investor, I just Googled it. It's at Target as well. It's linked there. Goodreads has you linked. Wealthmanagement.com has you listed as an author.
It does?
This is just from one Google like 2 seconds ago.
What's the book about?
The book is about how to be a social justice investor. And so it is written for everyday people. So people who don't have a background in finance, who want to invest in the potential of people through their financial decisions and don't know how to get started. And this book lays out step by step how you can do that, really what investing looks like, how you can do it with a financial advisor or go it alone or do it through like your 401k planning. And also because reading about finance is boring. And I've read a lot of finance books and I totally understand that reading about finance is boring. With every chapter, you get a little reward of a chicken soup for the soul style story, including 2 from Leah Freemouth and Ebony Perkins about moments in leaders in this field's lives where they faced a decision or they had this moment that affirmed or changed their lives in some way. So it's like read a section on how to hire a financial advisor, get a treat. Read a section on what is risk. Anyway, get a treat. So I wrote this in a way that is not boring and it's digestible and it keeps you going.
Oh my God, I love this. I love this. And you're out here like getting people ready and showing them how to do it.
You know, what's cool though, is that we don't live in New Zealand. I mean, because it's $44 New Zealand dollars there and a little bit cheaper here to order it in the US. So.
But in New Zealand, I feel like you get earlier access to Bluey episodes. So, there's a give and take in all things.
Man, that's awesome. Congratulations.
Thank you. It's like the machine is in motion because I didn't know that this was happening and all of a sudden it's out there. Oh, I got my cover. I'll have to send you all a text and to all of our readers, as soon as I can share it publicly, I can share the cover design for it, which we've been working on. My editors and I have been working on it for a few weeks now, and they keep refining it. And every time it's like, it's so cool. Just seeing how it shapes up and really creative people are putting it together. And Stacey Abrams provided an endorsement blurb for the front cover, which I was like, oh, I melted. Like I was breathless there for a second. So it's coming together. It's 4 years in the making and it's coming. Oh my gosh. It's crazy.
This is awesome. You are an inspiration. I'm loving this. Like this is giving me so much life, y'all.
April 23rd, 2024.
It's coming, folks. It's coming. It's coming. Get ready. Get ready. Get ready. Get ready.
Y'all are very kind. What are we talking to today, Ebony?
My gosh, I'm so excited about today's episode. But you know what? Before we even dig in any deeper, I got a big question for folks. Systemic change is a buzzy phrase we hear about. I've heard a lot about systemic change probably within the last 5 years. I hear it thrown around when we hear others talk about all kinds of inequalities, whether it's racial inequality, gender inequality, all of that fun stuff, right? But what does systemic actually mean? And who exactly is responsible for the systemic change that we are demanding that we see? So what do you all think?
I think about just systems and systems that work through our culture. And I'm totally going to steal from Dr. Kendi. who wrote about it in How to Be an Anti-Racist when he talks about the moving walkway. And to me, that systems piece of, I always think about it when I'm at an airport and I'm like lugging my luggage along. And I'm like, oh, thank goodness there's a moving walkway. And there's a whole system in place that helps me get from one end of the terminal to the other a little easier. And it's designed to help me move forward easier. The whole system from like, I'm going to overplay the metaphor, but like from the actual conveyor belt, all the nuts and bolts inside, to the electricity, to the people who work on maintaining it, and the money that goes into installing it and maintaining it, that it helps you move forward and makes your life a little bit easier to the point where you don't even think about it until it's broken. And you recognize that, oh, it'd be a lot easier if I was able to use this thing over here that's designed to help me. And then you think about, what if you were working against that, where the system wasn't designed to get you further along, and having to work and walk against that, and how much harder it is whenever you're working against a system that's designed to work against you. Systems, when they're working for you, can help accelerate your plan, and it can help accelerate how you want to achieve your vision. But when the system's working against you, it makes it so much harder to be able to achieve your vision. And when everything is designed to go in one direction and you're not allowed to get on that walkway, or the walkway wasn't designed for you, or you're just discouraged from using that walkway, whatever it is, then that really sucks. And similar to Leah, who do I think is responsible, once you've recognized there is a moving walkway, to start walking in the opposite direction of it, and to figure out how to get more people on the moving walkway, or figure out how to reroute the moving walkway. That's how I think about systems and systemic change.
I love that analogy.
I think a lot about what John Holtzclaw said in one of our earliest recordings for Renegade Capital, where to be renegade is to be brave, and being willing to be that first voice to say, hey, this isn't okay. What can we do about it? Sometimes being that first voice can give encouragement and credibility to other people who want to raise their hands to and say, I agree. And sometimes I get intimidated to say something. And that's really helpful for me whenever somebody else raises their hand and says, this isn't okay. And watching other people raise their hand and say, hey, this isn't okay, gives me not permission, but it just gives me confidence in my own agency in future issues or future happenings, of just remembering, hey, that person did that one time. And this is the difference that it makes. So I think I can do this in this time. Leah's thinking hard.
I am, because I'm the talker in the meetings, and I can't say I'm that bold all the time, though. People that know me, sometimes they wait because they're like, oh, Leah will eventually say something. Like, sometimes it's not my place to say something. Even if I know something or I can, it's like the speaking up or holding space. In my mind, there's a difference between me articulating something or creating space for someone else to share their experience or to share, their perspective, and how you balance that. And also how you try to be aware of that in those live moments, that you may have lots of thoughts and opinions on what's happening in that moment, but it's not something that impacts you directly. And so is there an opportunity to empower someone else to speak, or to, give voice, or again, like I said, hold space for that conversation, even if you're not leading it. So I think there's not a passive, but there's a quiet way to kind of push through. And then there's the very vocal and direct way too. I don't know. Am I making sense?
Yeah, it sounds like you're saying sometimes you have to read the room.
Yeah.
To get a vibe of what's going on in others' heads by reading facial expressions or body language, or things that people are wanting, feels like they're thinking hard and want to say, but might need a nudge to do it. But also you don't want to put anybody on the spot.
Mm-hmm.
And it can be hard to know when to say something and when not to.
I'm coming from my place as sometimes the only woman or one of the few women in the room, and also as a white person. And if I'm at the table, the proverbial table, have I gotten another seat next to me? Or do I give up my seat because I shouldn't be there anyway? It's better served by someone. So it's like kind of those different positions of privilege. How do you bring other women in? How do you create space for communities that you don't represent? I think that's all kind of wrapped up in your role in the system. And back to my point earlier about awareness and my own kind of progression as my role in the system, and where I benefit a lot from my well-being and my economic status and my race and all of that stuff, and where I don't. And I mean, it's not a black and white answer for a lot of this, but I think it's just the acknowledgement there are systems that are broken and hurting people, and then where can you kind of break some of them open, from where you sit.
Yeah. This is Andrea Longton.
This is Leah Freemow.
This is Ebony Perkins, and we are Renegade Capital. And today we're talking about uplifting local communities and driving systemic change.
Renegade Capital Podcast is proud to be sponsored by U.S. Bancorp Impact Finance, a subsidiary of U.S. Bank, which is an industry leader in providing financial solutions that help create positive impact for communities and the environment. For 35 years, its tax credit investments in syndications, lending, and other financial solutions have helped create affordable housing, spur economic activity in underserved communities, restore historic buildings, develop renewable sources of energy, and strengthen community development financial institutions, or CDFIs, nationwide. Learn more at usbank.com/impactfinance.
And today we're joined by our friends at U.S. Bancorp Impact Finance, a subsidiary of U.S. Bank, and something I'm super excited about, our lead sponsor for the Renegade Capital Podcast for Season 3. As an industry leader, they finance projects nationwide that help build thriving communities and drive inclusive economic growth. U.S. Bancorp Impact Finance supports affordable housing, economic development, historic rehabilitation, environmental finance, and a growing syndications platform in order to create new sustainable financial opportunities for everyone. Miranda Walker is our special guest today, and she serves as Affordable Housing Impact Capital Manager. Miranda has nearly 15 years of development experience building communities, and in her role at Impact Finance, Miranda focuses on deploying capital to emerging developers of color. Prior to joining Impact Finance, she managed the development of affordable housing in the Twin Cities in Minnesota. Thanks for joining us, Miranda. By way of introduction, can you tell us a bit about yourself, your work at Impact Finance, and maybe a personal story about what ignited your passion for community development?
A bit about me. I actually had a somewhat circuitous route to community development, maybe accidental, one might say. I really wanted to be an architect. I really thought that's how I wanted to impact community, and went through school, graduated high school thinking I wanted to be an architect, and then decided out of the blue that I wanted to be a writer, and dropped out immediately because writers write, as I told my mom through tears. So I dropped out of college to write. Gave myself 5 years. In that amount of time, I not only did not win an Oscar, I was not even nominated for one. So I decided it was time to go back to school. And I didn't have any specific focus. I just was looking for a degree. In that time, I stumbled upon what was our studies of cinema and media culture, which came out of our comparative literature department, hearty liberal arts degree, but it really changed my life focus. So it really was the study of media and the study of text and the study of culture and analyzing culture and understanding systems, and was the first time that I really spent time understanding systems and understanding meaning and power dynamics, and really that major helped me to refocus. So immediately after graduation, I had this new dedication to community development and impacting community. And I joined AmeriCorps, went to the Mississippi Delta, worked for a year, came back in the middle of the '08, '09 economic calamity, wanting desperately to work and to get involved in community development and having no outlet. But I knew I needed to keep busy. So I started volunteering and ended up volunteering locally at a place at a nonprofit called Project for Pride in Living, and accidentally was working on some agricultural initiatives, urban agricultural initiatives, and they had no place for me to sit. except for on the second floor near their affordable housing development team. And I accidentally discovered the low income housing tax credit, or LIHTC as we call it, discovered housing as a community development tool and just never looked back. I thought, this is exactly what I want to do. I have figured this out. I thought that I wanted to impact community by designing the buildings, but I want to design all of it. I want to impact community by building the buildings that are there, by understanding how those buildings are financed and understanding how those buildings play and interact with other people in other spaces, with other built forms. So I went back to school, studied urban planning. And while I was an urban planning student, I was an urban planning student with a focus on housing, a concentration in housing, and started my work then, even while I was in school, working full time at a nonprofit. So started my career working on the development side of LIHTC, did that, did all types of affordable housing projects, 9% projects, 4% projects, historic rehabs, recapitalization, you name it, I did it, senior projects. And then I found that I'd done all of the projects. I had this list and I thought, well, what will be a new challenge? And I moved to a CDFI after that, and understanding financing and really understanding the mechanics of community development and specifically the mechanics around housing. I had worked again as a developer. I'd worked across the table from US Bank and bumping into US Bank and all of the great CDFI work that I was doing, and a position opened at US Bank that took the work, much of the work that I was doing at the CDFI, married it with the development work and gave a greater footprint. And so a year ago, in June of 2022, I joined US Bank and have been excited to work with the US Bank team. And that is my circuitous, wild, crazy route into the community development space.
That didn't sound circuitous. That sounded like fate. I accidentally sat next to this one group, and that changed my life forever.
Miranda, I don't think I've heard the tax credit programs explained, or even like kind of the 4%, the 9% with so much energy and like passion for it. I think it's so interesting. There's different programs, so I appreciate kind of your brain and your heart wanting to like figure it out and like get into that world. That's amazing.
I have found in my career that with LIHTC, you find out very early. And and I think that's great. I've had colleagues that, they start and within 6 months, they know this is 100% not for me. Or this is 100. If you love puzzles, I always tell people in the LIHTC space, we're starting with a problem. The market doesn't have a solution for providing affordable housing, specifically deeply affordable housing. That's the starting point. The starting point is, this doesn't work, go. And either you love that or you don't. I can't imagine. It's funny. I would have colleagues, and we would occasionally, when things get hectic and stressful, complain. Why would you do? Who would do this? Who would take this kind of work on? And then eventually, by the end of the day, we look at each other and say, "Well, what else would we do? We love this. On the worst days, we love this. So you love
Yeah.
it or you don't."
So, Miranda, I'm going to ask a question about the bigger entity. And so, US Bank and Impact Finance, because they've been in the game for 35 years. And they've been investing in community development all over the place for decades. It'd be understandable, as a large corporation, if they chose not to pay attention to the smaller communities, right? Or to ignore the needs of the average person. And they could have still been very successful. What really sparked their interest in the average person and helping local communities, more specifically BIPOC communities?
Prior to our rebranding as Impact Finance, it was US Bank CDC, Community Development Corporation. And I really think the name change to Impact Finance highlights what we do and also our aspirations is to really make impact. But we've been around, as you noted, we've been around for a long time, and our focus then on impact on community has always been there. The Impact Finance Group has always been focused on community, and specifically on community development, whether that's rural development, urban development. We really work across the country. We really work across communities. to find out specifically what communities' needs are because they vary from geography and community type. And so we're deeply invested in understanding community and being partners with community and impacting community. I do think, geography matters. And I do think that while it's not new for us to operate in this space, I do believe that our proximity to some of the nation's more recent incidents of social unrest have really heightened our focus. So our impact finance group is based in St. Louis, and I'm based here in Minneapolis, which is where the bank is headquartered. And so when you think about Minneapolis and you think about St. Louis and you think about social unrest and the ways in which, and the timing specifically over these last couple of years, from the killing of Mike Brown to that of George Floyd, one of the reasons that I joined US Bank and one of the reasons I'm really proud to work here is that we are hyper focused, I think, on impact and on community. And I do think that our dedication has been reflected in our space. I think our geography has impacted that. I think sort of the ways in which we as an institution, as employees, have again been close to understanding what some of those tensions are has really driven a lot of our work.
Do you have a story or an example or a borrower story of how you feel like your impact has been focused?
I would say that it really started even before my work at US Bank. So again, I've had history with the bank from various seats and always had these great interactions and always had great interactions with members of employees of US Bank. But I was working on a project, and US Bank was involved in the project. US Bank was the lender. And I just thought, first, I was surprised to see US Bank. This was a tough deal. And it was, again, a deal led by an emerging developer of color. And this was, before many folks launched programs. This was before US Bank presented our Impact Capital Fund to the special purpose, and it was characterized as a special purpose credit program. But being able to sit so closely to US Bank as that deal moved forward. And really, I was on the phone probably with the folks from US Bank more than the actual developer, trying to understand the deal points and understand, are you all really going to do this? Are you really committed? Are you really committed? And seeing that deal move forward and seeing US Bank, it was really, for me, the deciding factor of joining US Bank. I enjoyed what I was doing, but the ability to see an institution actually execute on a really difficult deal, to see it move beyond lip service. It was a very difficult deal, and I wasn't sure that this particular developer was going to find a lending partner. That US Bank stepped up and not only was the development part, but worked through some really difficult problems and was really flexible and was dedicated and committed to making this deal work. To me, that was the difference maker for me personally, of seeing it and being able to see behind the scenes and say, they're committed. This isn't, us having a conversation and US Bank giving me a number of bullet points or showing me a slide deck of commitments made or things that they want to do. It wasn't conceptual. It was very real.
Before you joined, we had our pre-interview talk with the co-host, and we were talking about what is a system and what is systems change and what is an institution, if not a group of people. And so whenever you were talking about an institution that was that committed to making this deal work, it just made me flash on, it's an institution is a group of people who are willing to dig in, to roll up their sleeves and make the puzzle pieces work, because they're motivated by what is the impact on the ground? What is this finance going to do? And how can this create a systems change of how can this finance fuel what we want it to fuel?
And Miranda, when in your experience, because it sounds like impactful and, showed you a side of the organization that you appreciated and could align with, what does it look like when it doesn't go that way? Like what is the opposite of what you experienced in deals like that?
I really feel like certainly we understand what hurdles exist in housing, in affordable housing. We don't have enough affordable housing. Many of us are over familiar with the barriers to diversifying the developer pool, the folks who are developing housing and specifically affordable housing. And I think one of the things that we forget to mention or is often left off of that list, we talk about access to capital because that's certainly a huge hurdle, but it's also transparency in the process. And that is to the earlier question, that is something that I saw on the other side of the table. But to answer your question, Leah, I often think that is what is missing when deals go sideways, is that it is unclear, specifically to emerging developers of color who have so many hurdles. It's a new shop, it is a new entity, it's a new endeavor. There are all of these hurdles. There's a shortage of back office help. There's a shortage of capital, often of liquidity, of just folks to do the work. And so when a curveball is thrown, when the process isn't made clear, that can really derail a project. I do think that we practice very well sharing with folks the process. These are the expectations. This is the process. This is the timeline. And I think that is very helpful to help people then manage those pieces. Is this timeline going to work for me? Will these hurdles work for me? Will these requirements work for me? I think deals go sideways when there are surprises. And those surprises are especially difficult for emerging developers to navigate.
Renegade Capital Podcast is proud to be sponsored by Self-Help Credit Union and Self-Help Federal Credit Union, which believe in the power of finance to transform lives and communities. Are you an impact investor looking to make a difference? Look no further than Self-Help, where your deposits can create positive change. Don't just invest for profit, invest for impact. Visit selfhelp.org/invest-for-impact today and start depositing into a money market or term certificate with Self-Help Credit Union, where your money can change lives. Self-Help Credit Union, ownership and economic opportunity for all. Miranda, you were speaking a bit about developers of color and emerging developers. Can you talk to us about your work with these groups and also why it's important to you and why it's important to US Bank?
Sure. So my official title is Impact Capital Manager, and I manage US Bank's Impact Capital Fund, which is specifically geared to funding developers of color, emerging developers of color who are financing live tech finance projects. So it's a $250 million fund that we funded. We've also been involved in similar initiatives with Enterprise with NEF, for example, and been investors in those projects. But this is a fund that we funded, and we purchase credits with half of that fund, and then we provide financing, specifically construction debt, to get these deals closed and to increase the supply of affordable housing. And so my job is to deploy those funds, again, specifically to emerging developers of color. What we found at US Bank is that, again, across the country, there is just not enough affordable housing, and we need to increase the supply of affordable housing. We've also found, as I'm sure many of your listeners know, the development space does not look demographically much like the residents of affordable housing, is that there is this real mismatch between the folks who are living in affordable housing and the folks who are developing affordable housing. And given the demand, you would think this would be an easy on-ramp for a diverse group of developers, but we're just not seeing that, or we haven't seen that in the space. And so US Bank recognized that and then really did the work of digging in and really asking why. Why is there this disconnect? Why do we see folks understanding affordable housing and the need for affordable housing and participating as tenants often? So we know that this exists, but not necessarily as developers. And we identified what some of those barriers were: developers in terms of experience, hurdles in terms of experience, hurdles in terms of liquidity requirements, and the ways in which these deals were underwritten, that they really put new developers, emerging developers, and specifically developers of color at a disadvantage in participating in development. The liquidity requirements, the requirement to have completed a number of deals that are just like the deal that you want to complete, regardless of how rooted you might be in community and how well you may understand the community. And so we know that when we look at wealth specifically in Black communities, for example, we know that there is an enormous gap between the wealth that Black families have and the wealth that white families have. And so for developers looking to get started and to tap into friends and family, that's especially difficult if not only you don't have the capital, that the folks around you, the folks in your circle, don't have that capital. So US Bank did the work of really identifying the disconnect, being honest about that disconnect and that disparity, and then identifying many of the hurdles. Why does this exist? And then creating solutions around that.
I was going to ask you to mention some of the solutions. You talked earlier about a special purpose credit product, which some of us know what that is and how that can help a bank do lending differently. But then there's also the grants and things that you all have given to CDFIs for their kind of technical assistance for the programs that they have. Because, yeah, the capital is one thing, but sometimes it comes down to some of the, like managing the cash, insurance, and things as these developers are scaling and growing and adding employees for the first time. There's support that needed to set them up for success, to take on debt and take on these bigger contracts. And so you've set those up with some CDFIs across the country. Is that accurate? Or
Absolutely. And I think you raise a really great point, is that there is much support needed across the ecosystem. So at US Bank, we've had a number of responses. So the work that I do is focused specifically on affordable housing and our impact capital fund in affordable housing. And so we pursued a special purpose credit program, and we presented that in July of 2022, and have really been rolling with our impact capital fund since then. And that allows us to have flexibility in our underwriting requirements and our pricing requirements targeted to specific communities. And so we've really been able to have an impact in those spaces. But beyond affordable housing, US Bank has its access to capital commitment. And so it's beyond just my business line. It's across business lines, is this focus on providing help to expand wealth in diverse communities, expanding access in diverse communities. And it includes outreach, for example, to CDFIs, which has been especially helpful in the work that I do. And to give you a really specific example of this, is many of my developers, again, back to the previous talking point, there is a great need for capital at the very beginning of a project. And there's great need for technical assistance and consulting at the beginning of a project. And that is often difficult to finance, to self-finance for, again, emerging developers of color. So many of my developers my successful developers are successful because they have partnered with a CDFI, or CDFI has partnered with them. So before they come and partner with me, there's really this connection that they've made with a CDFI, both for referrals to other professionals, other practitioners in the space, for technical assistance, for consulting, but more specifically for that pre-development, that really difficult to find pre-development capital. So our CDF partners are usually coming in early in the process and making it feasible, making the project feasible, so that once tax credits are awarded, that developer can then call me. It takes a lot of work and a lot of capital to get that developer ready to make the phone call to me. So we are quite dependent upon our CDFI partners partnering with folks in the community. And so we, as a bank, not only do I recognize that individually, we have an entire department, specialty finance, that works with CDFIs and provides CDFIs with, patient capital, recognizing that in the ecosystem that we're all connected.
From your perch, and this might be a big question, what does success look like?
Success I would say comes in two different ways, and I think I'm probably answering, giving an A and a B answer, but all technically the same answer. And to me, what it means is expanding and diversifying the space. I think too often the conversation is narrow, and we think of diversity as taking this, a slice of the pie that's occupied, as opposed to expanding the pie. So success to me looks like seeing more developers, but seeing that growth come in diverse developers, racially diverse developers, and seeing more developers, but specifically more developers of color. I would say the B note to that for me is what I often see with developers of color is that they have a deep tie to community, and they're also deeply engaged with community and also deeply dedicated to expansion also and to diversity also. And so I see often along their capital stack that play out. And so it's not just a developer of color that's receiving a developer fee, which is really how we take a look at growth in our impact fund, as opposed to, say, traditional lending, where developers tend to have to partner and are often at a disadvantage given limited liquidity and lean balance sheets, are often partnering and then taking a small slice of the fee. We look at fee and we measure fee. Our impact capital program allows developers to take advantage of the economics of the deal and larger portion of their fee. But I'm also seeing that those same developers are making diverse hires in terms of their general contractors, in terms of their architects, their attorneys, their accountants. And so we're seeing it across the capital stack. So success to me looks like expansion and seeing diverse growth across the sector, not just in terms of developers, but just seeing greater participation, that those developers are driving greater, more diverse participation across the industry.
It sounds like you're already starting to see that. Is that accurate?
I am. And it's often, I don't want to say it's anecdotal, but I have observed, to your point, that many of our developers have great diversity again across their capital set, and they're intentional about it. They are looking to expand the opportunity that they have to operate in this space with other folks.
So, Miranda, what mechanics and tools have you found uniquely beneficial for developers of color? Is there anything specifically that they need compared to traditional guidelines?
Yes. I have a laundry list. This is, like the list you give Santa. I have many, many items on my list. So, I think there are a number of initiatives out there. And again, US Bank is involved as investors in a number of these initiatives. But I do think there is a differential. I'm not familiar with all of the initiatives, and we often partner and so make great partners with other folks who are operating in this space. But I do think there is a differential with our impact capital fund. The way that our fund is structured, again, we are really focused on allowing developers to build wealth. The focus is on wealth building, the ability for developers to take a larger portion to really benefit from the developer fee and to grow their businesses from taking that fee. Traditionally, what has happened is developers who lack liquidity or lack experience or have lean balance sheets have often had to partner with larger developers to provide a guarantee. And in providing that guarantee, those larger, more established developers have taken a large percentage of the developer fee, which has left emerging developers of color sort of perpetually in this state of emerging, is that they're consistently taking 30% of the fee and then trying to reinvest that and taking 30% of that fee. And they never quite emerge. With the Impact Capital Fund, we have flexibility through the Special Purpose Credit Program to allow those developers to guarantee their own deals. And so they're able to take, if they don't wish to partner and they meet our liquidity requirements, which are more flexible and I think are a fairly dramatic departure from what we've seen in the industry, and guarantee their own deals and take their own fee and take all of their fee if they don't partner, for example. And that allows them to grow their businesses, to invest in pipeline. And I think that's what's needed. There needs to be intentionality around growing the wealth within these organizations and within these businesses. So I think that's a critical component to success in this space, is making sure that developers are earning the capital and able to take the capital from the deals that they're doing. I do think we were talking about CDFIs earlier. I also think securing pre-development funds is critical in getting developers even to that point. Is how can developers secure the funds necessary? Because these are big deals, and they are, if you're doing a 50 unit deal and, the average TDC per unit is hundreds of thousands of dollars per unit, just to get that deal into application, just to ask for the funds that you need, you often need to go through entitlement. You often need to have some measure of design and engineering, and that can be hundreds of thousands of dollars. And so the ability to get developers pre-development financing is critical to the success of these developers. And then I think ongoing support, and we have found that is again sort of baked into this emerging piece, is you're talking about smaller organizations, smaller companies, smaller entities. And often I'll see developers and it's a one person shop, or it's a two-person shop, or it's a one-person shop and a handful of consultants, which means as big as these deals are, as complex as these deals are, there just often is a greater need for operational support, just to make sure that these deals are moving efficiently. Sometimes just moving inefficiently, a deal moving slowly picks up costs, moving slowly. And you can see how that starts to drag on a project. It becomes more expensive as it goes for a developer that doesn't necessarily have the funds to support that. And it just becomes a growing problem. And so those are spaces where I really feel like successful developers are seeing when their needs are met in those spaces. I'm also finding that data is really important, and the ability to provide real-time data to developers so they have a strong understanding of what appropriate costs look like, what appropriate operating expenses look like, what they can expect. I think this gets back to the earlier note about transparency, is so that developers have a space to understand, you're only as good as your performance, only as good as the assumptions you include in it. And so the ability to provide developers with appropriate numbers, appropriate data, appropriate assumptions so they can size their deals appropriately.
Let's say you make all of those changes. Does this remove all of the barriers that these developers face? Do they still have any challenges that remain, even outside of the work that just US Bank is doing? There's a much larger industry, I'm sure.
Sure, absolutely. And I think this speaks to, there are hurdles specific to, again, all of those characteristics, being emerging, being a person of color, being an emerging developer of color. But then there are also just industry-wide hurdles, that this is an incredibly complex industry, and it's growing increasingly complex across states. We're seeing state finance agencies that are seeing an increased number of participants. Costs are growing. We know what interest rates are doing. And so everything is moving in a direction to make these deals incredibly more difficult, which is requiring more sources, which is requiring more time, which costs more money. And so just across the industry, there's a level of complexity that seems to be growing just year after year. And again, developers of color are participating in this space anew, but are not immune to those complexities.
This is really good information. And what actionable items can our audience take if they want to support this work that you're doing?
I would say number one, love your local developers. They need it. They're in desperate need of bake them cookies. They need support. This is really tough stuff. So love your local developer. I certainly think, again, CDFIs have been great partners for us, and I think ways in which folks can support local CDFIs, the ways in which US Bank is supporting local CDFIs is helpful. I really think understanding, for the public to understand the difficulty, and I can't express enough how difficult providing affordable housing is. Back to the beginning of the conversation, we start with a problem. We start with what can't happen, what the market can't do. For communities to have a better understanding of how difficult that is, to put these deals together, and the need for communities to really support all of the players in that space, whether it's US Bank that's supporting emerging developers of color, whether that's CDFIs that are supporting emerging developers of color, all of the entities that are involved, because there are so many across the board. I would just say a blanket support of these entities that support this developer, because there are behind the scenes, there are so many people sort of silently pushing behind the scenes to get these deals done.
Awesome. Thank you. So, at the end of every episode, Miranda, we encourage our audience to join the movement, if you will, and become renegades. So, how do you define renegade?
I would lean on the front part of our conversation around systems. I think of a renegade as someone who's sort of broken free from a traditional way of doing things and a traditional way of thinking. Again, I'm really proud of the work that Impact Finance does, and the space that they've provided me to really take a look at sort of back to my origins, back to film studies, back to analyzing systems, and really being creative and problem solving and saying, okay, let's take a step away and take a look at this, and let's analyze this, and let's figure out what's working, and let's figure out what isn't, and let's understand why. To me, that is what a renegade is dedicated to doing, is understanding what systems are at play, and how is it working, and how is it not working, and then how do we fix what isn't working. I would define that as a renegade, dedicated to analysis and creative problem solving.
Thank you so much for joining us. This was an awesome episode, and I love the systemic approach that Impact Finance is taking to address some of these really hard issues.
Well, thank you for the invitation. I appreciated it. I don't often get a chance to sort of nerd out, if you will, on tax credit. So it's been as fun for me.
Hey, this is Renegade Capital. All nerds are welcome all the time.
I'm gonna call dibs on the chocolate chip cookies to bake for my local developer. I don't know what flavors y'all are going for, but that's my go-to. That and snickerdoodles.
Yeah, I mean, I really like what they're doing. I mean, it's easy to ignore something, and they are at least taking a stab in order to figure out, hey, let's address this issue of only supporting certain developers. One thing that I really respect and acknowledge that Miranda hit on is it's not just you're working with a developer. They in turn connect with different suppliers within that local community. And so it's a ripple effect. It's a larger community being impacted by the work. And I don't think that can be denied. So their work is so widespread, probably more than they are even reporting on, because there's some things you just can't measure, right?
I'm admittedly jaded, with banks and when they say special purpose credit product. And, I kind of go, okay, cool. I'm glad you've taken that step. But I think similar to how Miranda agreed to work there and has been leading that work, it's like they're actually using that product and the bank's ability to target, to underwrite differently. They are literally putting their money where their marketing and their mouth is. like, and it's refreshing, especially with the word bank in their title. I just, like I said, admittedly kind of, expect different from especially from large institutions. And so this was great to hear. I'm encouraged that this is out there, and hopefully other large financial institutions can learn from this and follow suit, because it really is being willing to find the solution. We know what the problems are. We know how to underwrite deals, but it's the willingness internally to get the special purpose credit products on the market and actually use them, and move the underwriting and work with risk and get the lender's goals right. I don't know. It's
Like finding those internal champions who want to make it happen, who see that there's a problem and how do we fix it, and regardless of what our organization has done in the past, no, regardless of what our institution's name is associated with or peers that we're associated with, how do we identify this, have a solution, and actually implement it?
well, and And it sounds like it was an organizational initiative, because you can have internal champions and they can run up against that brick wall over and over again. And maybe one brick moves or maybe one like window opens, but like this was an internal systems change to actually execute it. What, 250 million? I mean, that's not just some small grant or one or two deals. Like that is a internal system saying we are committed to this, and it's rare.
And to see the ripple effect of that just in this interview, I'm sure there is a great story that someone may share someday over drinks and after a signed NDA of how that happened internally and how to move that to the point where you actually get a signature on it and you get a green light and get funding of go, to then how do we create underwriting policies around this? How do we get around those obstacles of liquidity and track record and experience to get the money funded on the ground so that these groups, emerging developers of color, are able to earn that larger developer's fee, are able to build wealth, but also to hire other professional services that are not lily white, who are also deeply connected to their community. So to see that ripple effect all the way out from people who are listening to what's going on in the ground, here's the problem, and how do we push something forward? How do we do what we can in our seats to create a systems change? That was really cool to see how that all played out.
Thank you for listening to this episode of Renegade Capital. If you like what you heard, you can listen to previous episodes on your favorite podcast platform, and be sure to follow us on social media at Renegade Capital, or check out our website, www.renegadecapitalpodcast.com, to never miss a new release. Our show is hosted by Andrea Longton, Ebony Perkins, and Leah Freemount, publicized by Elizabeth Gilbert Ketzel of Narrator Studios, and produced by yours truly, Chance Lee.